Over 5,000 people have died trying to cross the Mediterranean since 2015. That was the year then that we began to talk about a migrant crisis, as around 1 million people tried to reach Europe's shores. Well, here, European capitals became consumed with headlines and with statistics, and the stories of those who died en route were rarely told. But the journalist Tanya Tervonen wanted to try and change that. She spent over a year retracing the steps of one person who lost their lives in a shipwreck that killed 800 people. It was a journey that took her from Italy to Greece, through Niger and to Senegal, and eventually it became the book In the Land of the Missing, which is published this month. Tanya Tervonen joins me this morning to discuss. Good morning. Thank you very much for coming in. First of all, tell us a bit how this story started. You arrived then in Italy in the aftermath of this terrible shipwreck. What did you do then?
Well, the shipwreck was in 2015. On the 18th of April. About 800 people died in that shipwreck. Actually, nowadays we're talking about 1,000 or 1,100 people in that small ship, which was 21 meters long. So you can imagine how it was packed, fully packed with people. And it was the first time that a European government decided to try and identify the victims of the shipwreck. And that kind of decision hasn't been made since. So I started to follow the work of the forensics, trying to identify those persons who were inside that boat. And I also tried to find out what was the story behind those numbers, because actually here in Europe, we used to see all these numbers and we tend to forget that behind every number, there is a person. And behind every person, there are other people, because there are parents, there are children, there are spouses who lost their beloved one.
And you focused, didn't you, on one person that didn't have a name. They had just a number. That was PM 39000047. And all you found of them, if I understand correctly, was their phone and the case that it was in. What did you do just with that? How did you try to find out who that person was?
Well, I knew right from the beginning that it was impossible for me as a journalist to find out who that person was. I don't have access to that kind of information. The only persons who have access to that information is the family of that person. But what I knew was that among these 800 or more people that were on the boat, about 200 would have come from Senegal. I know Senegal very well because I grew up there until I was 15. So I decided to try and find out what were the stories of those who had left that country, who possibly were people who grew up there, like me, like I did, but who don't have the same privilege that I have with my Finnish passport to cross the borders legally. I mean, I can travel around, I can go and decide to work in France or go for holidays in the US or in Vietnam or in Senegal, and it's absolutely no problem. But for other people, it's not that easy.
And so you really retraced the steps as much as you thought was possible to go from Italy back to North Africa, to Niger, and then to Senegal. Tell us, what did you find? What did people tell you about some of the reasons why they took such a dangerous journey to try and reach Europe?
Well, the reasons are always very different from one person to another. I mean, you can leave your country because you want to study abroad. You can leave your country because you want to have a better life for yourself or a better life for those that you leave behind. The reasons are always very intimate reasons, because it's not an easy decision to leave your family, to leave your work, to leave your country for something that you don't know, that you know very little about, for this kind of dangerous journeys, because the people know that the journey is really dangerous and they are risking their lives. But they have no other option, because crossing the borders legally is not possible for some of them.
Yeah, and you mentioned then one of your goals is to try and humanise what has become really kind of faceless numbers and statistics of these people who die at sea. Aside from your own writing, how do you think we do manage to humanise people who we just sometimes simply label as migrants or refugees?
We have stopped humanising them, I think, here in Europe. We just see numbers, we just see faces, but we don't see the people behind the faces. We see these like anonymous groups of people. And this word migrant, it refers to all of these images that we just saw actually here, images of the boats filled up with people who don't have names, who don't have stories, who don't have families, but actually they do. And we forget that.
But there are fewer people now trying to reach Europe than there were back in 2015 when this shipwreck happened. Do you think that our perception of migration and refugees is getting better, or is it getting worse nonetheless?
Well, there are fewer people because we have, I mean, the borders of Europe now, it's not on the Mediterranean, it's in Libya, it's in Niger, it's in Turkey. So the borders are going further and further away of the Mediterranean. So that's why people are not coming to Europe. I think that all this talk about migration has become a political issue now in Europe, and it's very, very difficult to talk about it in a different way. That's what I tried to do with this book, is not to make it a political issue about opening or closing the borders, but just maybe, you know, reminding that we, as white European people, have a huge privilege, which is we don't have to risk our lives.
Yeah, and I wonder then, as somebody who grew up in Senegal, have you seen that have you seen things worsen in terms of the economic conditions, perhaps, that have forced people to leave, or are things by and large the same, but perhaps the journeys towards Europe are a bit easier?
Well, the journey is not easier. The journey is more and more dangerous. It's more and more difficult. And what we forget often is that most of the people, be it in Senegal or in other countries, don't want to leave their home country. They want to stay where they are. They want to stay with their families. They want to stay with their jobs and so on. No one wants to leave his or her family like that behind, not knowing whether you will be able to see them again. No one wants to do that. So if you take that decision, you have reasons to do it. And it can be economical reasons, but it can also be other reasons, you know, looking for a better life, and or having dreams, wanting to, you know, make something out of your life. And the people that I met there in Senegal, the families of the people who had gone missing while crossing the Mediterranean, all of them had different reasons. There were some where the parents had decided that they would pay for the journey of one of the persons of their family so that he could work and send money back. And then there were young people who had decided just to go for adventure and had told nothing to their families.
All right, Tenya Tervonen, thank you very much indeed. She is the author of In the Land of the Missing, which is just out here in France.